but there was no focus on the asset known as your body, your physical body, your emotional body, your mental body. This is the asset that is producing the money that needs to be protected by all of these service providers. And I'm a big believer in, if you are not vertical, you're not in service to anybody or anything. So you need to be vertical. If you think about this wheel of service, Ben, we are in service to our partner, whether it's domestic or otherwise, perhaps a spouse, children, perhaps a religious community, your clients, your customers, your colleagues, your neighbors, your friends. We are in service to them. And if we're not protecting the asset, our body and our mind, we are offline. And therefore, we're not in service to anybody. So I'm a huge believer in protecting the asset. And you can do that any number of ways. You can do that physically, you can do that emotionally, you can combine those two. But that's just our well-being in order to be in service.
So, Carl, my question is like, I mean, I think that the more and more, especially as I do this podcast and also as I'm living my life, I realize that the profound is in the simplicity, right? And like as what you talked about is super simple. You know, the asset is not actually the natural outcome of probably protecting your like assets of your mind and body is potentially, you know, the money, service, impact. I I'm curious, is this something that you have always done? And when you think back, I mean, or did you have like a moment where you were like, man, I'm playing the wrong game?
Absolutely. So I was very athletic and active as a kid, athletic and active in high school and college and law school to a degree. I then got out of law school, and for the next 5 years, Ben, it was hammer time. I was pounding the hours, but also pounding the fettuccine Alfredo at 10 at night. And my exercise fell off, and it was ironic because 2 years into the practice of law, I was able to afford, and I bought my very first new car. I treated that new car, Ben, way better than I treated myself. I mean, down to polishing the rims with a toothbrush.
Wow.
This went on for 5 years. I'll never forget it. It was about 88 to 93. At one point, I looked in the mirror and I said, this is not sustainable. We are headed in the wrong direction. And at that point, that's when it was an aha moment for me. And I always wanted to run a marathon, and I always wanted to run the New York Marathon. So it was right around Thanksgiving of 93, 5 years into practicing law, and I decided I'm going to run the New York Marathon. And I did in 95. I just set my mind to it. And by the way, I didn't have any friends that I knew that ran marathons. I didn't know what I was doing. So I geeked out like lawyers tend to do, and I bought a book and I read it on how to run a marathon, and I followed it. And that corrected course. And from that point forward during my career, and it continues to this day, I focus on that because when I do, I show up better for everybody in that wheel of service that I mentioned. I'm a better husband. I'm a better father. I'm a better friend when I tend to the asset and when I get my workout in, which I like to do in the morning for reasons we can get into. But yeah, there was a moment where I knew that my track in practicing law was not sustainable. And I had a mentor here or there say the first few years of practice are critical. That's when you learn the tools of the trade. You can't waste them. So I was all in on that. And the hours didn't bother me. This is what I thought I needed to do to become the lawyer I wanted to become. And I did that. But what gave was the physical side of the house. And that showed. And that's how I course corrected. And I just set my goal because I love the stick and carrot. I set the goal and I followed the track to it. And I was off and running literally and metaphorically.
So I think a lot of, especially growth-minded, competitive, driven people can probably commiserate with that. But what are the questions? I mean, you're as a recovering attorney, right? Is that it's about the questions that you ask. So people are listening to this today, going like, okay, I can sort of resonate with that. They look at themselves in the mirror and they're like, they look around them, they go, man, I got the house, I got all the things. But maybe in terms of they look at themselves in the mirror and they go, not my magic. What are the questions that they should be asking? I mean, what are the top 2, 3 questions that you think that, boy, like if they're the judge, jury, and you're having to give the closing argument, what is that?
I think the first question is, do I need this? Whatever that widget is, or whatever that thing is, whatever that um, inanimate object is, do I really need that? Because if the answer is no, then you need to get rid of it. If it generates no joy, but only misery or stress or anxiety or angst, then cast it away. It's like that with relationships. You have energy vampires, and everybody has relationships. And by the way, if you read that Harvard study that's gone, the arc of that Harvard study on happiness, um, the biggest outcome is it's relationships that lead to happiness. And we all have folks, we've encountered them, who are energy vampires, not my phrase, but it's exhausting to be around them. So you need to take a step back and say, do I need this in my life? And if the answer is no, then you got to get rid of it. And I think once you get rid of something that's uh, sucking your energy, you can fill it with something that pumps you up, almost like you go in front of a Jiffy Lube and you see that floaty guy with the arms waving because there's air and he's being inflated. There are things that inflate us. So find those things.
That's a great example. The feeling that I get, Carl, as you and I are having this conversation, is that you take incredible amounts of, I could almost say extreme amounts of ownership for like your actions. And I'm curious, is that something that you have just come to? And I think follow on, is it something that you see even, I mean, because you work with like some pretty high functioning human beings. What is so hard about owning your actions?
Well, I'll start by saying thanks for bringing this up, because ownership to me, it's a huge deal. I do this column. I post every Friday. I've done it for 5 years. It's called the Friday Fix. I end every post with own the day, own the weekend. And there are multiple meanings to that, but it's all around the concept of ownership. And that's been eroded. We talk about social media. And again, not my phrase, but you have keyboard warriors, people that hide in anonymity. They're cloaked in anonymity, and all they're doing is tearing people down, and they're doing it anonymously. In the professional world that I lived in for 30 plus years, you can't do that. Every pleading that I signed back in the day, that was a physical signature. Now it's an e-signature. But every time your name is on a pleading, Carl R. Fix Jr., you are stating to the court that what is in this pleading is not designed to vex, harass, or annoy, and not designed to mislead the court. You are owning that. And when you stand before a judge and the judge says, Mr. Fix, on page 15 of your brief, you state the following. Tell me more about that. I can't say, well, Judge, a clerk did that. A law clerk, or that wasn't me. I just signed the pleading. You're not running from that. That you own that. So the thousands of pleadings that I signed in my career, I owned it. I couldn't escape it. I couldn't dodge it. And that's a lesson I learned when I was very young from my father. Um, it's just, you own it. It's your name. It's your legacy. This is who you are. And, when I was a little kid, I mentioned I was a paper boy. Those people needed their paper. I owned that. I did that 7 days a week. And back in the day, I was like a mini Walter Cronkite. I was the first guy out of the gates delivering the news in the morning. And people at 5:36 in the morning were standing at their door waiting for me. So I needed to get up every day and deliver the paper, and I owned it. And then I would go around and collect my money because I delivered. So pay me. So the ownership thing, I think social media, there's a lot of anonymity. And I did pivot after 25 years of the law. I pivoted for 4 years and I ran a foundation. And there was a lot of what I call the scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz. When the scarecrow goes like this, it's which way should I go? Go left, go right. And when I inherited this, I took over this team and I said, we're going to make some changes. This is what we're going to do. And if it fails, it's on me. If it succeeds, it's all of us. And when I said that, I got more buy-in because I didn't think it would fail, whatever initiative I was proposing, but I said, we're doing this. And when it succeeds, it's on all of us. But if it doesn't, it's on me. And you could see the people in the room visibly relax, like, oh, okay, he's gonna own it if this thing craters. And it's like, yeah, I've gotten my teeth punched in court, but you win some, you lose some. I won more than I lost, but every victory was mine and my team, and every loss was mine. And I just owned it. I just can't get my head around these people that want to skirt and skate responsibility.
Do you think that we have lots of ownership today? Like, I mean, outside of social media, right? I mean, do you think that most people take ownership of their day, take ownership of their actions, take ownership of their feelings?
I think the jury's still out on that. I think what we've witnessed during this, and I'm not going to get political, but during the last 40 plus days, we've had a lot of the scarecrow, both sides of the aisle saying, no, the shutdown's your fault. No, the shutdown's your fault. So they're not modeling behavior for the next generation, categorically not modeling proper behavior because there is no ownership. And America loves a comeback story. And you see, the Hollywood glitterati, the athletes who come off the rails, when they step up and they say, I'm sorry, this is what I did, it was wrong, and it's on me. People embrace that. But it's when they make excuses or point to somebody else, it's never their fault. That's not embraced. So I sometimes I get hopeful that, hey, I think we're trending in the right direction, but then we, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, because some of our air quotes leaders are really not modeling behavior for the next generation. They're just not.
Yeah. What's so interesting, their leadership is such a glib word to say, right? We say leadership, but like the word leader is so complex, right? And if we've talked about, there's like, and I want to get into this a little bit about emotional intelligence, but let's come back to this. But you said something I thought was really intriguing, Carl. You said they're not modeling it for other generations, and I think that so often, I think a lot of us, when we get into these scarecrow moments, right, where it's like, who did it? It's anyone but like themselves. Is that you talked about modeling for the next generation. And I think that gets lost. In fact, I would tell you in terms of, as I'm having a lot of conversations, I don't really hear anyone talking about the importance of this idea, leading by example, like do unto others what you'd have done unto you, right? Which is in essence kind of what you're talking about. Can you talk about like the impact and the importance of thinking beyond the present moment and thinking about how this ripples into generations?
Yeah, very much so. I think it's selfish to just think you're in this on your own. We all have, I think, a responsibility to pass things on to the next generation. I mean, excuse me, today, as we know, we're recording on Veterans Day. My father and my father-in-law both were World War II veterans. These guys they were born 9 months apart, and they were identical. And they were, to me, great role models. I mean, my father was a man of integrity. He got up, he went to work, he provided for his family. He just did things quietly. He was not a man of many words. And, but he modeled behavior. Like, I graduated from law school on a Saturday. I was home on Monday. I graduated from college on a Saturday. On Monday, I was home. I was going to law school 10 weeks later. And he looks at me on Monday morning, because I would always like to have breakfast with him. And he looks at me Monday morning. He says, "So now what are you going to do with your life?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to law school." He said, "I know, but that's in 10 weeks. And I said, "Okay." And he said, "You didn't get a job for the summer yet, did you?" And I said, "No. By 5 o'clock today, you better have a job." And he went to work. By 11 that morning, Ben, I was on a moving truck for Mayflower Moving, a local moving company. And it was the best job I ever had upon reflection. And it was just 10 weeks. And then I went to law school. And when he turned 80, we had a party for him. And my brother and I kind of roasted him. And I told that story. And after, he said, I said that? I said, "Yeah." He said, "I feel bad about that." I said, Don't feel bad about that. You lit a fire under me to just get out and find a job. But he just moved about life quietly like that. But it was modeling, like, even though I'm going to law school, but big whoop, I needed to go out and work that summer. I wasn't going to lay around and sun myself and, have, party for 10 weeks. So I think there is a responsibility, and we can't shirk it, because there's certainly, again, the last 40 days have shown us the absence of behavior that is proper modeling.
Does power corrupt ownership?
In my humble opinion, I think it does, because there's a certain level of narcissism that comes with that. I'll share an interesting anecdote. I was practicing law. I was going to the Westchester County Airport to pick up an expert witness to take him to the clients. We were getting ready for a trial. I was a younger lawyer at the time. The expert witness is flying in his own private jet. I pull up to the fixed-based operator. I walk in. I'm in my suit. And I said, "I'm here to pick up passenger X. Here's the tail number of the plane." And the guy looks at me and says, "You need to sign the book." And I said, "What book?" He said, we have all the livery drivers sign the book." And I said, "I'm not a livery driver." He said, "Well, who are you?" I said, "I'm just a guy picking up somebody off a plane." He said, "Would you mind signing the book anyway?" I said, "Okay." So my name, livery company, I wrote the name of my law firm. And then I gave it back to him, and he said, "Okay, go park over there on the ramp." So I said, "Why?" He said, "That's where all the livery drivers park." I said, "Okay." So I could have said to him, No, you don't understand. I'm a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. I'm here to pick up. I'm not a livery driver. I'm not signing you." But it's like, who cares? So I had a little fun with it. So there was perhaps a power dynamic there that I was not going to engage in. I was not going to clap back at this guy for making me sign the book that limo guys sign. So I had a little fun with it, and I've written about it.
We all stand on the shoulders of giants before us. And I know you're talking about like your father and grandfather, right, in terms of being these heroes. That reminds me of these little moments that, that we never know in terms of when our being present is a sunrise to someone else. Like your father that day was a sunrise to you. You didn't necessarily know it until much later. But like, wow, that was a sunrise on my life. Is that, I remember after I had left college early, and started what in essence would now become my first company. And I had just closed like the largest deal. You have to understand that, if I got like a $500 check, that was like, whoa, that was a lot of money to me. And I got vastly more than that. And I remember telling and being excited to tell my dad about it, being like, wow, like, hey, like you have arrived, I got this deal. And he was like, okay, great. And then he had later on, I think I'd seen him maybe a week later, he'd given me a present. And it was you could tell it was a book, when someone gives you a book as a present, you're like, like, okay, this is a book. And I remember like getting it and being like, oh wow, that's really great. And the book, he said, I want to give this to you. And he goes, congratulations, like that's exciting. And the book was all about integrity. And I just remember that because it was like this sunrise to be able to go, hey, it doesn't matter how successful you are, but what matters is what do you do when no one else is looking? And that was just such like a pivotal moment. And even to this day, like I remember talking to him, be like, yeah, when you did that, and he goes, well, I don't remember doing that. And
Yeah, 100%. I mentioned to you that I pivoted after 25 years and I ran this foundation, which was affiliated with a hospital. And I did that for 4 years. And I left and went back to the practice of law for a number of reasons. And one of them is there were certain institutional handcuffs that were on me. And there was an issue which had the potential to erode my integrity, and I elected not to be part of it. And that's what I told the folks. I said, my father always told me you're measured by the company you keep. And I'm electing to move on. And let's leave it at that. And I sacrificed a lot. I made my own decision. I sacrificed a lot, leaving a very lucrative gig at my law firm to go to this not-for-profit. And I then but I elected to go back to the law firm because I maintained my law license. But I had lost a little bit off of my fastball, and I needed to get that back. So there was sacrifice there, all on me, but it was the integrity thing. Like, I am not going to be a part of this. And I wished them well, and I moved back to my law firm where I resumed the practice of law. But people aren't always willing, and this isn't well, how noble am I? But people aren't willing to make a lot of folks are not willing to make sacrifices. And there are sacrifices that you have to make along the way. Um, and you just got to be ready for it.
the words that keep coming to my brain is, we're talking about leadership. We talked about like ownership and the importance of owning your actions. But it also strikes me is that as I'm listening to you, the importance of the intentionality of how you show up. And intentionality, not just these are all another word for intentional is intentionality, I think, is decisions, right? Because it's a reflection of the thinking. And I'm also curious. So I want you to hang on to that word. And then also the other thing that I'm just realizing as I'm listening to you, to really take ownership, I feel like you have to have a lot of EQ, right? And EQ has become sort of like glib, talking about, like IQ and there's EQ. But I think that especially the thing that excites me about AI coming into the world is that it's the forcing of the actual beingness of being human. And I'm curious for as you have in your own journey, but also as you are like collaborating with leaders and coaching leaders, the importance and the power of intentionality. And I also want to, and you can take chef's choice here, but also I feel like the importance of for you to really take ownership and have the intentionality is having that emotional bandwidth, that intelligence.
I'll start with the intentionality. So I mentioned the Friday Fix. I post these every Friday, and we can get into the genesis of that because I love it. I love talking about it. But I did a post a couple months ago, perhaps, where I mentioned a well-known comedian is on tour, and the name of his tour is "It Ain't Right." And I was asked by somebody, if you were on tour as a comedian, what would your tour title be? And I said, it ain't hard. And I talked about intentionality. It ain't hard. I know that's not proper English, but it's not hard to affirm rather than to tear down. It's not hard to lead with humility instead of ego. It's not hard to express gratitude instead of criticism. It's not hard to connect instead of isolating. It's not hard to own your mistakes and not deflect them. It just takes intentionality. And I had, again, I used bullet points in my post because that's the way I used to write as a lawyer. So, I listed a dozen or plus where things, it's not hard to do these things. It just takes intentionality. It's no different when you walk into a hotel and you approach the front desk to say, how's your day going? And it immediately, I don't want to say diffuses, but it changes the dynamic. And I'm not just checking a box here. I mean, these folks, they got a tough job. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to tear them down. How many times, if you go to a restaurant, I've been thanked for not yelling at the person manning the front desk. If the table's not ready, thank you for not yelling. And I always think, wow, it's sad where I'm being thanked for not drawing down on this person who's going to, bring me to my table. It's crazy. So there is intentionality in that. And a lot of that stems, I think, from, you mentioned emotional intelligence. So what is that? Let's use an acronym, RUM. Recognizing, understanding, and managing your emotions in its simplest terms, the acronym RUM. So that recognizing them is that self-awareness. And the self-awareness, I think, is missing. There's a lot of self-awareness that's missing. The ability to read the room. And I think that's a generational thing. When, again, we come back to the social media, when all you're doing is sitting on your phone and you're connected to somebody via a phone, not face to face, or even on these Zoom calls, or physically in a room with somebody, you can't read the room. I mean, think about texts that you've read where tone, inflection, and the like are absolutely missing from it. And there is miscommunication because words come out, but there isn't a facial expression. There isn't emphasis. There isn't, again, the tone, the inflection. So the ability to read the room is not something that the next generation is getting practice with.
Yeah. 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 That's interesting. Did you come up with that RUM acronym?
Yeah, I just started playing around. And that's the easiest way to recall it.
But I want to dive a little bit more into that, the power though of the emotional intelligence, because we go to school, right? I mean, at any point did you have a class on emotional intelligence in grade school, high school, college, law school?
Absolutely not. And again, upon reflection, as we get older, we have the benefit of hindsight. And I look back and I think, okay, I wish I had a little more of it back then. I really do. It's interesting. I just had my 40th college reunion and I went to it. I graduated in 1985 and I had this wonderful conversation with this woman that I knew. And she was talking about the chapter in my book, The Difference. And she said, I can't believe you wrote that, Carl. And I said, why? And she said, and she was being kind. She said, you were a little different in college. And I said to her, I came to college as a 17-year-old boy. 2 months into my freshman year, I turned 18. So I was 17 when I landed there. And I didn't know up from down. I was a boy. And I said to her, I was scared. That's what I was. I was a scared boy. And what do scared boys do? They try to act tough or macho. It's your default, right? So I think back, my emotional intelligence was zero in 1981. I mean, I could navigate the world, but I was still maturing on multiple levels, physically and emotionally. So I said, yeah, the boy you met 44 years ago is not the one that's standing before you right now. And that's reflected. And so that came through in the chapter, obviously, that I wrote. But it's one of those that would have been good to have back then, a little more of a little more EQ. But we learn from it, right?
Yeah. It I think that the emotional intelligence, I think, is the thing that, as I reflect on my own journey, but also, the journey like that my parents, put my sister and I through. They spent a lot of time in retrospect helping us tap into and own our feelings. And the time I remember being like, well, none of my friends have to do this stuff. It's sort of like, okay, mom, dad, like, this is awkward, and but in the retrospect, what they were doing was, I think, really giving us a leg up on being able to connect and have a conversation around feelings, right? Because feelings are, I mean, we talk so often that, and I think that, and I'm curious your perspective on this, that this is an energy game. How we interact with each other is an exchange of energy. It's an exchange of currency of energy, right? As you talked about energy vampires, right? That just suck you like dry and or fill you up. And I think that it's the thing that when I look at, my own daughters, that it's such an important part of the education that, quite frankly, I think when you bring in technology into this, that it's actually the thing that has probably the hardest headwind, even more so now, because it's constantly under assault.
I love the energy word. My daughters, as I mentioned to you before we went live, one's 25, one's 20. And when I'm with them, I want to bring my A game. I try to bring my A game for multiple reasons. Um, one of them is it's just the way I choose to live my life. Number two is I'm just modeling behavior for them. But, you know, they, they do date. And I want it's my shot across the bow as a father that, hey, you want to date my daughter, you're going to have to keep up with her, and I'm no slouch either. So my eyes are going to be on you, and that's just a paternal thing. And I will go out. I will go out early on a Saturday morning, take a long bike ride. I track it on Strava. I then screenshot it and I send it to my daughters. And I do that to inform, not to impress. And I say to them, have a magical day. Or I say, go out and make some magic today. I've already made mine because I love to get up early. But that, I hope, incentivizes them to go out and they'll say, well, if dad just rode 50 miles, then I can do X, whatever X is. My youngest is still in college. It may be that I have this project and I don't want to go to the library on a Saturday, but I get this text from my father that he went out and rode 50 miles. And if he can ride 50 miles, then I can go to the library for 5 hours. So I hope, one of my hopes, although we know hope's not a strategy, but I hope my desire is that it incentivizes them to do something magical that day or something that benefits them.
Yeah, what's just struck me, Carl, as I'm listening to you, is that there's like a another superpower that no one ever talks about. Like in the investment world, we call it compounding, right? Which is like the eighth wonder of the world. It's where like massive and massive amounts of like wealth. When you think about when you stack skills, right, in compounding. But the word that it keeps coming to my head that I feel like that is an underrated word is consistency. Like I want you to go back and talk a little bit about like right in terms of you said the genesis of your Friday Fix, which I think, and you and I were talking, I think 2 weeks ago, like you were, I think right about now you're publishing like your 252nd Friday Fix. And, you talk about like, hey, the consistency of showing up, the consistency of being intentional, the consistency of, owning your actions, the consistency of sending your, those rides to your daughters, the consistency of saying, make your own magic. Uh, I'm curious, can you share like what the genesis was and kind of your thoughts around, or maybe even before that, your thoughts around the word consistency?
Okay, I'll start with the consistency. I think you set it's all about expectations. In your relationships, you set expectations. I had certain colleagues. That I knew certain colleagues would react a certain way, and then there were the ones that were unpredictable. Similarly with clients. I represented a very large construction company, and again, through the arc of my career, multiple presidents of the company, and one of them was all over the board with discipline. He would fire this guy because he didn't like him. He would keep this guy because he liked him. He would then fire that guy for no apparent reason. And I would say to him, you just need to be consistent. People need to know how you're going to react. You don't, if you're sitting in the C-suite, you don't want somebody knocking on the door to come speak to you fearing their life, whether you're going to explode or not. So I think consistency is about setting expectations. And, my friends, I'd like to think my friends, my family, they know I'm going to react or act in a certain way. We joked, you said we're both endurance guys. Um, it's not with my friends when I see them, it's not, did you ride this morning? It's how far did you ride? The baseline is they already know I rode. So it's not, did you, but it's how far. So that they know when they see me, we went to a UConn basketball game 2 weeks ago and I had ridden that morning. So my buddy said, how far this morning? And I told him, and it wasn't, did you ride this morning? So I started the Friday Fix. I started posting during the pandemic. And these were longer posts, and it was really to deliver some good vibes or good news to people because the news cycle was so apocalyptic. So that was in 2020. So what I decided to do was, starting the first week in January of 2021, was start posting under this Friday Fix. And it's a double entendre. The design was, it was a Friday, Fix is my last name, but the genesis was to deliver some little nugget of wisdom or hope to whomever that may need it to perhaps help them through the week. And what that ties back to, Ben, was when we were little, my parents would take us to church, and there were some priests who would talk for 15 or 20 minutes in their homily. And it was like a history lesson, and you got nothing out of it. There were others that could get in and get out in 3 minutes, and you felt, oh gosh, he really delivered, right? So the idea was a 250 to 300 word post where I get in and I get out. And I would like to think that sharing my foibles or my anecdotes, that I deliver a message that may be helpful to people. And that's really what I've done, and I've tried to be consistent on the messaging. I don't get into politics, and I share a lot of stuff where I came off the rails. And again, I don't do this. There's an ego tug there, but I don't do it for that. And the feedback I've gotten, I talked about where my sophomore year of college in one post, I really came off the rails, like really badly. And my father nudged me back on the rails. A buddy of mine read that and said, hey, timely post. I said, really? He said, yeah, we just cut off our son. We told him, you want to go to college, you're going to pay for it yourself unless you get your act together. And I was like, wow, how about that? And I bump into people that they don't comment, they don't respond to my post, but they've commented to me in person. And I thought, oh, I didn't know that he or she read my stuff. So that's the genesis. It really started from when I was a little kid, and you can say a lot in very few words. And I love to point out that the Gettysburg Address was under 3 minutes. So Lincoln said a lot in 3 minutes. So I think we have the power with words to say a lot with very few words. And that's what I'm trying to do, because I don't want to give 1,000 words. I just want folks, if they want to read it, to get in, get out, and maybe there's a little takeaway that they might be able to lean on in the week going forward.
The Gettysburg address was 3 minutes. That's incredible. That's incredible. Again, going back to a lot of the things I'm hearing you say, I think everything that you've talked about falls in the realm of simple. And again, this is a common theme that seems to keep coming up as I have like these incredible podcast guests like yourself, is that the things that provide the greatest impact are not just fully packed up in complexity. It's actually the unpacking of that. Like you talked about the Gettysburg Address, 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That doesn't sound complex. That sounds in terms of intentional. It sounds like ownership, and it sounds like showing up, right? It all in like that in a 3 minute piece here. One of the things that it strikes me, I think the people who are watching this on YouTube will be able to see. Carl, how old are you?
I am 62 years old.
62 years old, right? So at a time and place where, when you look at the chronological age, right, a lot of people are going, well, geez, like you had a pretty successful career. I mean, you and I were just talking like, hey, you and your wife just went down to Florida for a week. We're down to your place down there, right? And, they'd be like, oh, why don't you just ride off into the sunset? What is it about? And again, I'm saying this knowing because you and I have had some conversation around like, and I think the word that you use, and I love this, is that this idea that chronological age is just a red herring.
100%. Let's start with, for instance, AARP. They bombard you when you turn 50. So at 50, I'm getting mailings that are inferring or cajoling me into retirement. That's a mindset thing. When I pivoted from the practice of law at the age of 57, people would say, "Oh, you're retired?" And I'd say retired is pejorative. I find that pejorative. I'm not retired. I don't announce from a mountaintop, "Hey, this is what I'm doing." I mean, we do marketing and all that, but I, I I'm not retired. And I reject that. And I will never stop. So long as I'm able, I will never stop moving. And that's how I wind up my chapter in the book, The Difference, that, I took these various losses, repackaged and repurposed them. And it's really designed to perhaps help folks, or empower is, I don't like that word because it looks like I have the ability to empower people, but, that they'll look at this and what's that?
Maybe give permission.
Permission. I like that. That to never stop moving, never stop experimenting, never stop learning, as you continue to grow. And it's a mindset thing that I'm not, I mentioned to you, I got a new hip in July. That new hip is like, that's low mileage now. So in my right hip has got very few miles on it, and we're going to crank them up. That's like, I got new parts. And when I turned 62, and again, I say this to inform, not to impress, a couple weeks ago, I went out and rode 62 miles. And I did that for a reason. I wanted to reflect on my life. So every mile represented a year of my life, and I reflected on that. Mile 17, I went to college. Mile 24, I passed the bar. Mile 30, I got married. Those miles, when my kids were born, when I lost my mom, when I lost my dad, and I was able to reflect in that 4-hour ride, the arc of this life and how blessed I've been, but there's a lot more to do. I love the movie Shawshank Redemption, and there's the line in there, get busy living or get busy dying. And it's a great thing. I'll tell you this funny uh, story. In 2005, the Rolling Stones came to Hartford, Connecticut, and at the time, Mick Jagger was 62 years old. And in 2005, I was there with my buddies, and one of them looked at me and said, "When we're 62, Carl, you're the only guy who's going to be able to do that, because Mick Jagger can run up to 12 miles every concert. He runs up 10 to 12 miles every concert." So my friend in 2005 said, when we're 62, you're the only guy who's going to be able to do that. And I'm 62 now, and I laugh about that. And I went out and rode 62 miles, not for a flex, not to impress people. It was my gift to myself in gratitude for this surgical team that put this implant in me, and everybody that helped and supported me. And I wrote about this, and I pulled the thread of Luke Combs' song "Back in the Saddle." The bike's the saddle. He sings about being back in the saddle. I was back in the saddle, but you don't get back in the saddle alone. You have a community that helps you. So this was like, hey, community, look at what you helped me do.
Powerful. That's really powerful. In some of our conversations, this kind of harkens back a little bit, Carl, to you and I have a similar love of Dylan Thomas's poem. I love if you shared your kind of perspective on that. And for those who don't know what that is, maybe kind of talk about what that poem is, because I think that dovetails nicely into this idea of getting back into the saddle, riding the 62 miles, and really like rejecting the fact that 62 is an actual benchmark of where you are chronologically. Do you mind talking about that?
Sure. So the Dylan Thomas poem, "Rage Against the Dying of the Light," that's actually, I titled my chapter in the book, "The Difference." I used that, "Rage Against the Dying of the Light." And again, I discuss my pivot from the practice of law at the age of 57. And it ties in with, I talk about in that chapter, my brother-in-law disappeared in 2014, and he's never been found. It's been, or coming up on the 12-year anniversary. So he disappeared at 57, and I pivoted from the law at 57, and I'm sure my brother-in-law Paul didn't think he was going to disappear. So I was concerned the practice of law was not delivering the way it had in my earlier days, and I was feeling, again, less hopeful. And so I wanted to rage against the dying of the light being life. Like, so I've been given this gift, which I want to talk about in a minute. This gift of the ability to be an endurance athlete or to do these endurance events. And I didn't want the light to die. I wanted to rage against it. So how do I rage? And I know rage there are different meanings of that word, but this is more metaphorical. But I wanted to reject the dying of the light. And how did I do that? I did that by founding this company, No Surrender, and going out and working with folks to inspire them and to have them recognize their gifts and to use them to lead others.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so important. You know, just to be clear, when you were talking about your brother-in-law disappeared, you're not talking like ethereally, like in terms of like within him, he like physically disappeared.
Yes, he in 2014, early 2014, he disappeared in the Tonto National Forest in Arizona, which is a national forest the size of the state of Rhode Island. And a very intensive search came up empty. And so he's never been found. I've since read a book, the title escapes me, about the number of people that actually disappear in national forests. It's really amazing. It's a stunning number. But Paul and I did a lot together, and he was a very inspiring guy. But yeah, he literally disappeared. And ironically or not, and I write about this, the search for my brother-in-law commenced the week my mother died. So we were juggling these two things, and it was, I will tell you, my legal training at the time kicked in. I was able to bifurcate and silo these two losses to be able to deal with them at the same time, because otherwise it would have been fairly overwhelming. Um, so again, I was sitting there, and upon reflection, I thought, I have these gifts. I need to use them. And I thought, if I pivoted and founded this company, I could be more in service to the community. And that's why I did what I did.
Yeah. Just as a side note, one of the things that I do every year is I have a group of guys that we go and we bike a century day. So for those, not a metric century, but 100-mile day, and it inevitably ends up being like 112 to 120 because we took a wrong turn somewhere. And but we do that in a different state every single year. And anyways, the a lot of times it creates the time and space for us to have some of these conversations. And to your hiking thing, one of the guys had made a case. He said that hiking is more dangerous than skydiving, and we all were like, nope, 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 nope. And then we actually looked it up and we did some fact finding. It's hiking is, I think, 5 to 6 times more dangerous than skydiving. So to your point, random little factoid. To your point,
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, and again, I opened my chapter talking about this journey that Paul and I took in the Weminuche Wilderness in Colorado. I had never spent a night in the woods before, but Paul wanted me to come out to Colorado, and he said, "You'll do fine because you're in shape." And off we went for 3 days. And he was the ultimate mountain guide. I mean, we were completely and utterly disconnected from the world, and we hiked all day and then made camp at night. I mean, we were on the top of this almost a 14er in Colorado, Tabletop Mountain. You could see, Ben, for 90 miles. We were on the top. We were above the tree line. You could see 90 miles away. You could see the San Juan Mountains. And I almost dropped down. He said, "You see that, Carl? That's 90 miles away." On top of the world. We were disconnected. We had a satellite phone for safety purposes, but we had no watches, we had no phones, we had no devices, we had no nothing. It was, I mentioned the Jimi Hendrix song, Kiss the Sky. I mean, we were kissing the sky. And this was Paul's temple in the sky, and it was his cathedral. And I've called cycling my asphalt cathedral, because it can be a very religious experience when you're doing the century that you just mentioned.
yeah, yeah. There's something about finding clarity in discomfort, clarity in silence, clarity in the monotony of just existing. That I think it's. I think oftentimes people go, well, that seems like a long way to ride it. It is. In the same time, in the whole spectrum of our life, it's really not that much. But I will tell you, the amount of clarity that I come away from those long rides is just, it's incredible. Um, Carl, how would you tell people, right, that we're regardless of their age, what are the questions, what are the frameworks that you would say that, hey, had I known this when I was 40, had I known this when I was 50, had I known this when I was 30, that this would be help me rage against the light, the dying of the light. Can you kind of walk through what frameworks now that you've put in place that might help others build to whatever their version of the dying of the light is?
I would start by, you think you have all the time in the world, but you really don't. So I think you need to be mindful of that. I said earlier, I'm sure my brother-in-law, when he woke up that morning, didn't think or know that he would disappear. And he did at 57. We all have friends that we've lost that are young. You've suffered loss in your life. Um, so we think when we are younger that A, we're indestructible, and B, we have nothing but time. Those are illusions. We're not indestructible, and we don't have all the time in the world. So we need to make the most of it. Um, but really in the weeds, I love to schedule things. What gets scheduled gets done. Period. Full stop. And you need to treat the asset the way you treat anything else. I in my training seminars and the like, I'd say people think nothing of standing in a Starbucks line for 20 minutes. No big deal. I want to get my whatever. I don't go to Starbucks, but my grande, whatever. 20 minutes, no big deal. Well, in 20 minutes, you can do a pretty good workout. We spoke about the Peloton. There are 20-minute HIIT workouts on the Peloton that will have you crying for your mother when you're done. So you could take that 20 minutes that you think nothing of spending in line at a Starbucks and maybe work on the asset a bit. And then just be more mindful. I wish when I was younger, I was more mindful of nutrition, of the ravages of alcohol without getting preachy. It's funny. People that smoke, they're treated like lepers. I noticed the progression in my office at work. The smokers would be out in front of the building. Then they get moved to the parking garage. Then they get kicked out of the park. I mean, they get pushed further and further away from the building. They're smokers. They're lepers. But there's a hotel in the building I worked in. In the hotel bar, all bets are off. You drink as much as you want. It's no big deal. And there's a disconnect, but it's societally acceptable to drink. And I don't profess to be an expert on this, but we've all seen the ravages of it. And so why don't you know more about that when you're younger? But you watch I like college football, I like the NFL, and there's all beer ads. There's all Johnny Walker Red and Captain Morgan, and it's cool, but it's as destructive, I think, again, anecdotally, as smoking. But those that drink are not treated like lepers, like smokers are. So that's another thing. It's like upon reflection, well, yeah, there was a big emphasis on that back in the day.
Yeah. Carl, that's interesting you talk about that. One of my mentors, Dan Sullivan, he made this analogy that we're like who we are, our assets, our mind and our body is very much like an aisle in a supermarket. There's only so much shelf space. And for who you are being and who you want to become, if you want to expand that asset, your mind and your body, there are things that can no longer exist on there. And a little over 3 years ago, actually almost 3 years, 2 months, almost 3 months, is when I actually quit drinking. And not because it was just more health. And I actually started off innocuously. And the fact is, I was just getting some blood labs and wanted to get a really good reading. So I was like, you know what, I'm not going to have and it was like having a glass of wine once a week. But I was like, I want to get some really good, clear for myself, for, metrics to really understand a baseline. And what I found was, and maybe it was coincidence, but I don't really believe in coincidences. But when I just had made that 6-week commitment, all of a sudden things just started happening in my life. It's like, because I took that off the shelf, all of a sudden it was like the universe, God started looking at my shelves and going like, wow, there's a ton of empty shelf space. that now I can actually put the things I've been wanting to put in your life, like for you, so with you, so that you can be of more service. And that's I appreciate your I think your context in bringing that up. But I think going back to this idea that it's an energy game. This is 100% energy game in your assets, and I like that you keep referring to it as the asset. I think we think about assets, we think about stocks, bonds, what's your net worth, but really at the end of the day, you are transforming this to be able to go. Your asset is really the collection of your capabilities mentally, emotionally, and physically to be able to take ownership, bring intentionality, consistency, and service for others. Is that a fair statement?
Very fair. And, you talk about the energy. Your kids, again, not everybody has kids. I get that, but they have friends, they have other family members. But your kids want you to be present. I mentioned my dad. I played high school football. I played high school baseball. My father was at every game. He had the ability, and baseball, obviously, football was once a week. Baseball, a couple games a week. I'd look into the stands, and there'd be my father. Game was over. I'd look up. He was gone. That night at dinner, unless I brought up the game, he never did, but he was there. So when my oldest daughter was in junior high school, she was playing field hockey. Her very first game was about 30 miles from my office. I was jammed up that day, but I said, I'm making this game. And I ripped down there, Ben, full freaking lights and siren to get to that game. Like, I broke 1,000 traffic laws. And I got to that game, and they were about to start this field hockey game. And she looked up in the stand, and I was there. And I didn't care if I went to jail for breaking those traffic laws. I wanted to be there. And she looked up, whether it was conscious or subconscious, I don't know, but she looked up and I was there. And that's what the kids want, you present. And again, when you're on your phone, you're not present. I mean, how many times if you go grab a bite to eat, you got 4 people at a table and they're all on their phones. It's like, oh, look up, I'm up here. I'm up here. Let's talk. Let's put the phones away. Let's connect. I when I'm with my older daughter, we love to spin together. So whatever town we happen to be in, we'll grab a spin class. I get to do that with my daughter. I mentioned gifts, and I wanted to give you one of my favorite quotes by Steve Prefontaine. And it is, to give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift. And what is the gift? That the gift can be different things for different people. But the baseline is whatever gift or gifts that you have, if you give anything less than your best, you sacrifice that. Both of my daughters danced. That was a gift. I can't dance. They were competitive dancers. I would go watch them. My friends would cut on me saying, oh, God, you got to go to a dance recital? And I'd say, you know how talented these kids are? Do you know the amount of work they put in? Do you know the confidence it takes to stand up in front of 200 people and dance? That's their gift. And I would always tell my kids, you got to give it your best. So we all have gifts. And what are they? I'd like to think that giving your kids, being present for your kids is a gift. It's a gift from you to them. Same with being present for your family, for your spouse, for your partner. It's a gift.
Hmm. What a funny thing that the thing that we can give is the thing that costs the least. Just being present. I mean, just being present. One of the things when we talk about energy, um, you know, what, we've talked about intentionality, ownership, and being present, you transforming like loss into something, right? To the rage against the dying of the light. And I think one of the things that, when we talk about divisiveness and social media is the thing that I feel like I don't see a whole lot of is around, I think, the power of forgiveness. Carl, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think so often, especially in these media cycles, and you're talking about this government shutdown, right? There's, I could say that potentially over the last 25 years, the proclusivity of not forgiving or the lack there of forgiveness, when you think about political parties and the ideologies and what people do or don't do, think about COVID, right? And kind of what that forced into our lives and pitting people against each other. Can you talk a little bit about the power of forgiveness? I mean, because you think about a powerful energy, man, forgiveness, I feel like, is right up there next to love.
Agreed. There's Admiral William McRaven. Admiral McRaven, he oversaw the Osama bin Laden raid, and he dropped a new book, I think it was last year, called The Wisdom of the Bullfrog. And Admiral McRaven said, it's equally as difficult to forgive as it is to be courageous. It's very, very difficult to forgive. And I will tell you, the profession, again, that I lived in most of my life, is very unforgiving. And forgiveness in that profession is a sign of weakness. And that is a potential, you are taught, a potential fatal flaw. It is not. It is categorically not. And in the Wisdom Collection book that I've contributed to that dropped this summer, I write about forgiveness, and I'll share that story. I'm happy to do that because I wrote about it. It's very powerful. Excuse me. Another brother-in-law of mine was ensnared in a federal corruption scandal in Connecticut, and he ultimately pled guilty. And I was categorically not going to forgive him for what happened. He came from a very public family, and the press ravaged the family, my wife's family, ravaged them. And for that, I said, game over. And he had what I thought, as a young guy, he had what I thought I needed. He had the cars, the vacations, but upon reflection, I didn't. So I was not going to forgive him for this. Now, this is 2005. I was practicing law. But despite this position, and I was not going to give in, I said to him, he was going to be sentenced. I said, Bill, what can I do for you? And he said, give the rabbi a ride to court. Well, the rabbi at the time was 93 years old, a local guy who survived the night of glass. Survived the night of glass and what the Germans did to the Jews. And I picked up the rabbi and we drove to court. And in that 45-minute ride, Ben, he converted me. He dropped me into the night of glass. He dropped me into the story and how he lived. And he said to me, when we think that human beings are less than they are, then they really are then we are really nothing ourselves. I'm paraphrasing. And he said to me multiple times in that ride, he, meaning my brother-in-law, needs our forgiveness and he needs our love. And by the end of that ride, Ben, I had decided I need to forgive this guy. If the rabbi, who was almost exterminated by the Nazis, could find forgiveness and love in his heart for that, then I could forgive my brother-in-law for what he did. And what that forgiveness did, it opened up a lot. He was sentenced. He served time in a federal prison camp about 120 miles from here. And we would take our girls. My wife and I would go to see him, to make sure and to let him know that he, despite what happened, that he was loved and he was known and he wasn't forgotten. And a byproduct of that forgiveness is the relationship he has with my daughters. It's very good. And I, not selfishly, but I do trace that back to the visits. And we just wanted him to know that he was not forgotten. This is all because of that rabbi. Lawyers love the but for this, something doesn't happen. Well, but for my ride with the rabbi, I never forgive my brother-in-law, but I did.
Well, it goes back to Carl, what you were talking about, modeling the behavior that affect the next generations. 90-year-old rabbi affecting the next generation by modeling the behavior. Therefore, you in turn then create the ripple then down to your daughters. I keep coming back to this current environment that we're in, I think, like specifically right now, that is so contentious of people's political beliefs. And the thing that keeps coming back to me is, and I'm curious your thoughts, is empathy a side ingredient of forgiveness? That's question number one. And number two is, what gets in the way of people being able to forgive? And why is it so hard? Why is it so hard? I mean, there's so many children's books that are teaching kids to say, I'm sorry, or to forgive.
Empathy, we'll start with that. Empathy is, again, back to the emotional intelligence. You've got your self-awareness and self-management. That's personal. And then you've got your social awareness and relationship management. Social awareness is how we interact with other people, and empathy is a necessary component of that. But it's hard for people to be empathetic, because it takes some self-awareness. But why is it hard to forgive? Because people don't like being wrong, number one. And I think it's viewed as a sign of weakness. I said that a few moments ago. And believe me, I mentioned in the book, The Wisdom Collection, being an endurance athlete, when you, Ben, set your mind to riding your century ride, you're going to do it. And it's the outcome is almost predetermined. It's fait accompli. It's happening because you set your mind to it. And that's how I was back in 2005. I set my mind and I was entrenched. I'm not forgiving this guy. And the rabbi could read. You talk about energy. The rabbi was clearly getting the vibe. When I was driving, I was kind of looking at him and I was gripping the wheel. I could still feel it. This was 20 years ago. He was definitely getting the vibe that I was pissed. And he just looked at me and said, he needs our forgiveness and our love. He picked up on that. And then he became the teacher. Then he taught me through his story of surviving the night of glass. And I was able to say, okay, self-awareness is how we feel. Self-management is what we do. So how was I feeling at the time? Okay, I'm recognizing this emotion. I'm understanding it with the help of the rabbi. Now I need to manage it. And you know what? This lack of forgiveness is not doing me any good. I mentioned the Nelson Mandela quote. Resentment is like drinking poison thinking it's going to impact the other guy. So the rabbi helped me not drink the poison. But I had to square that away in my own mind. Like, this is not a sign of weakness. And you see it again. We talk about the shutdown. I don't think people want to be viewed as weak. And I think forgiveness is confused with weakness. Nelson Mandela said, resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. I put that in my chapter. Yeah. Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. A good friend of mine who's a retired chiropractor, and he's now a shamanic healer. He said to me once, Carl, many times we need to lay down our swords. We need to lay down our sword. And the thing is, Ben, everybody's got their sword out. And what are we doing? I mean, the collateral damage from this shutdown, like, what are we doing? Take air travel. Forget about me flying home from Florida. Yeah, it was great that I got home. But what about the people that can't fly to a family member's funeral? or a child's wedding, a major life event that are they're being impacted right now as we speak. For what? I mean, the collateral, you talk about ripples, the collateral damage on people's lives, and what that does, I think it just erodes trust in these elected officials. Like, you are toying with our lives. For what? Because you're entrenched.
Yep. And here's the part, and here's the part that is I think the real poison is that everyone's going, whose fault is it? It's the scarecrow moment, right? That you were just talking about. It's everyone else's. And um it's yeah, well, I love that quote. I had not heard that quote, but man, that is really, really, really powerful. Uh
Back to ownership. And this is a matter of public record. A good friend of mine, Akeem Novak, who's a author and leadership coach, he wrote about this after I told him this story. A few years ago, I went to Denver for a conference, and suffice it to say, it was a long day of travel. And when I checked in, I did not act well with the front desk. And I got in the elevator, and as I'm going up to my room, I could see I'm staring at my reflection, and I said, "You are such a bleep, bleep, bleep. What was that all about?" I didn't even go to my room. I came back down. I still had my wheelie bag. I went across the street and I got a Starbucks gift card. And I came back and I approached the front desk, and this young woman looked at me wearily. And I said, "Hi, I just want to apologize to you." She said, "You don't have to do that." I said, "No, I'm doing that. I'm apologizing. I did not act the way I should have acted." And I gave her the gift card and I said, "Please buy a coffee for you and your friend," or whatever. So I'm telling my friend Akeem this, and he repurposed it and came out with this article, and it was captioned, "Great leaders apologize well." Now, I wouldn't say great leader. I just owned it instantly. And it was a very interesting article that it was very well done. He talked about the power dynamic of me checking into this hotel, and about, and when I got in the elevator, that I could have had a few juicy rationalizations and said, it's no big deal. It's really not. It's been a long day. It's okay. But I instantly thought, okay, I didn't act well, and I need to fix this like ASAP. And, the father of two daughters, I thought, would I want some dude like me treating my daughters if they worked at this hotel like that? When the answer was no, that's when I knew I had to instantly fix it. And I had to eat some crow there too, Ben, and that's okay. But I fixed it. And I think my entire trip, had I not done that, would have been ruined. I really do, because I would have thought about that. And I may not have ever seen that particular front desk person again during my 2 or 3 day stay. So I may not have had the opportunity to correct course. I said, "Oh, I'll deal with it tomorrow." No, I didn't get there. I did it immediately.
bringing this back to biking, I had done, see here, maybe 7 years ago, Ragbri, which is the ride across the state of Iowa, which if you are ever want to ever have a gateway drug into what does it mean to bike, I'm telling you, that is the event. And it was the event that was a top 3 event in my life. And here's one of the reasons why, because you don't really realize the impact you have, that your energy that you bring, the fact is retransforming your energy from being maybe rude or insensitive, and then transforming that into kindness, empathy, and then also asking for forgiveness, right? Which is, talk to Brene Brown. She would just say, like, vulnerability is the superpower, right? That is actually the superpower. That's actually the humanness of connection. But during that ride, you're riding along, and they close off all these roads. You have to understand that this ride, there's like 30 to 40,000 people. And so inevitably, you are constantly coming next to someone. And it really struck me that, that I feel like in what your story is articulating, is that there is more that is in common than that differentiates us. And I think it's that empathy, that humanness, that human beingness. And I had so many different interactions that even today, 7 years later, random people that I will never see ever again. That their acts of kindness, just being aware, of being self-aware and then self-managed, was just astounding. And you realize that there's so much more potential for us as a human beings.
Agreed. Couple things. Number one, Ragbri is on my short list. Number two, Brene Brown, one of her great quotes is, who we are is how we lead. Who we are is how we lead. So it matters. But on the third point about your interactions with these thousands of riders, that's because you listen. I practiced law for a long time. I don't speak Latin. There's a few Latin phrases I do know. One of them is my favorite. It's an Augustinian phrase, audi alterum partem. Listen to the other side. Audi alterum partem. Listen to the other side. If we are not listening to the other side, we are not having a conversation. We are not having a conversation. And you see that with the pundits. They're screaming over each other. There's no conversation. But you were listening to the other side as you rode. You were listening to the other side. And that's very, very powerful. I can tell you the chief complaint when people find out I'm a lawyer, they want to bitch to me about their lawyer. And I'd say to them, let me guess, your lawyer didn't listen to you. Yeah, right. You're right. My lawyer didn't call me back, or I was talking to her, but she wasn't understanding me because she wasn't listening. It is another superpower to be able to listen to others. Had you, Ben, not been listening to your fellow riders in that ride across Iowa, you wouldn't have these feelings you have 7 years later. Like, you connected with them because you were listening to them. You were listening to their story. And people want to be heard. If you're a mediator in a legal dispute, the first thing you're going to do is allow the person who feels that they're aggrieved to speak because they want to be heard. And once you allow that, I always said, and it's crass, but they would vomit on the table. They would get out everything that was bothering them. And once they got that out, we could now get down to perhaps resolving the matter. But when people feel like they're not being listened to, it leads to bad results.
Yeah, it totally does. It totally does. Yeah, my big aha happened, I think, at like when I was 23, 24. Someone had recommended reading Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence Others. And truth be told, I've never finished the book because I got to the chapter where he actually says the number one thing that everyone is looking for is to be heard. And I just went, I don't think I don't need to read the rest of this because it is so true. I think that if we can see, hear, and understand people, I think it's the quintessential ingredients of, like, what does it feel to help someone feel loved?
Yeah. And seeing people and listening to them and hearing them. I did a post earlier this year, and I'll share the story with you. My daughter graduated from law school in DC. I'm down there with the U-Haul. I'm going to move her back to Connecticut where she's going to study for the bar. There's this service called TaskRabbit where on an app it's almost like an Uber, but TaskRabbit will bring in people that will help you with tasks, including moving. I went and got the U-Haul. I come back. There's my daughter. And she just graduated from law school, but she looked a little ashen. I said, what's up? She said, TaskRabbit just canceled on us. I go, okay. So now we got to switch to plan B. And we had a monster sleep sofa that I could not get myself. There's no way. One of the maintenance guys in the building overheard this. And he comes over and he says to her, you need help with something? And she said, yeah, my dad's here. And he said, I'll help you. So he grabs another guy, Ben, and they moved the sleep sofa, and I thanked them, and I was pulling money out to tip them. And the guy's like, oh, no, no, we're going to help you move everything. They moved basically everything into the U-Haul. And I wanted to buy them lunch. So I took them aside and I pulled out some money and I said, I want to buy you guys lunch. You didn't have to do this. And the guy looks at me and said, your daughter's always been nice to us. That's why we did it. Now, these are maintenance guys in an apartment building in Washington, D.C. And she's just a law student minding her own business, but was always nice to these guys. Not because she wanted something from them. It's just, I'd like to think that she might have seen some behavior that was like that. And in return, they loaded this truck, Ben. But for those guys, we're sucking pond water. Like, I'm not getting this couch out the door. So I wrote about this and I told her it will serve her well in the practice of law because it's people behind the scenes at a law firm that make it hum.
Not just in law firm, in every organization.
Every organization. I learned that. I was a messenger in a law firm. I was a college kid. And people would talk in front of me as if I didn't even exist, and I would hear what went on. And I took a mental note when I went to law school. It's like, okay, the admin staff runs the show. And you're 100% correct. It's not limited to law firms. So that was just a powerful real life anecdote that the way she treated these guys who most people just summarily ignore, don't even acknowledge them. But the way she did that resulted in that truck being loaded and off we went to Connecticut. So it's just, there's a lesson in there that just the way to treat folks.
I think that just what a great way as we wrap up our conversation today, Carl. That's such an inspiring story. What a proud dad moment. I mean, what a proud parent moment to just go realize that you have created that ripple as you talk about modeling behavior that you hope the next generation pays attention to. And these simple things that these are simple energy force multipliers. Hard stop.
100%. And what I wrote, Ben, now I received my law degree 37 years before in the same city. I was more proud driving up I-95 of what those guys said to me than a few days earlier, my daughter getting her law degree. I mean, I knew she'd get her law degree. I knew that. And once she got started on it, I knew it would happen. But so I wrote about that, and I said that is a matter of public record, that I was more proud as a father the way these guys helped us than my daughter getting her law degree.
Carl, I want to say thank you for being here. For those who say, hey, you know what? I really like what Carl has to say. I want my 3 minutes of get in, get out of your version of the Gettysburg Address to be able to create impact. Where can people find more about you, like socials, your newsletter, any type of connection points where people can reach out to you?
I am on LinkedIn and Facebook. Just punch in my name and you'll find it, but also my website, which is carlficks.com, carlficks.com.
Yep. And then again, if they're looking for you on LinkedIn, the one note I want to put is that you are under Carl Ficks Jr. And one of the things you had shared with me beforehand was that for the first 24 people who comment on YouTube, we are going to get you connected. Carl is going to send off one or both of his books. Carl, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I've contributed to 2 books recently. One is called The Difference, Essays on Loss, Courage, and Personal Transformation. And then the one that dropped this summer, which became a #1 international bestseller, is called The Wisdom Collection. And that's stories that transform how we live, connect, and lead. and I've contributed to both of those. So I would like to, I've got 12 copies of The Difference and 12 of The Wisdom. And the first 24 people, I'll get you a copy of one of those. I'll mail it to you.
Well, that's incredibly generous, Carl. And today has been an absolute generous journey. Just incredible conversation, Carl. As you know, as you've listened to some of my other podcasts, I like to leave our guests with the last opportunity to affect the next generation, to create the ripple, the thought, the question, the quote, the call to action. What would you have our audience?
Well, first off, thanks for having me. This has been wonderful. I've so enjoyed our conversation. My final thought would be, before I get on the bike, Ben, I say a little prayer, and I say, may I ride safely and give it my best effort. And the best effort ties into the Prefontaine quote that I mentioned to you earlier. So I would, my desire or wish for people would be that they ride safely, and it doesn't have to be a bike. Whatever their journey is, their ride, their journey, I wish it to be a safe journey. But along that way, let them give their best effort. So ride safely and give your best effort. And I think if you do those things, the magic will happen.
Making the magic happen. Carl, thank you so much for being here. And thanks for your generous sharing. Thanks for the generous offer to send out those books to the first 24 commenters. And thanks for what a beautiful ripple.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you for listening. A big thanks to Elation Lab for the production and creative design. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Keep listening for more Max Life.